Well, even if one were inclined to believe that the first chapters of Job spoke of the Satan, they would be very hard pressed to prove that this is really the actual Satan of fame. Why? Because this Satan could do nothing without God's express permission. Let's go to Job 1:12. The Lord said to Satan, "Behold, all that he has is in your power. Only upon himself put not forth your hand." So Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord. Job 2:6. And the Lord said to Satan, "Behold, he is in your hand, but save his life." Again, Satan did nothing until after the Lord said these things. Is that really the Satan of church tradition? One would think that if this were indeed the actual devil, that he wouldn't reveal his evil plans to God in the first place, to where God could intervene on his fun. Unless we could say with absolute confidence that the devil is so powerful that he can even sway God to his evil ideas. But we have to remember what I had spoken on in the first chapter of this book, namely of what Paul said in the book of Romans. Romans 13:1 through 2a. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be, any power in existence, they're ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resists the power resists the ordinance of God. Does this not include the devil? Is the devil exempt from that decree? Now, with that, we have another explanatory note. For is the devil exempt from that decree? Perhaps one could conclude that this only applies to beings who have a soul. You know, like people. However, the Old Testament admits that even God has a soul. Isaiah 1:10a. Hear the word of the Lord, showing that this is God's dialogue. And then we read in chapter 1, verse 14a, your new moons and your appointed feasts my soul hates. Therefore, if a being doesn't have a soul, how could they be an actual being? For a soul is a soul, whether it's a living soul or a dead soul. Therefore, Romans 13:1 through 2a does not exempt the devil in this case, if one were inclined to believe that the devil is an actual being. But as far as God having a soul is concerned, it certainly can be argued that God can't have a soul like a human being. And I'm certainly not going to try to argue that point here, or even Strong's dictionary and its meaning for soul must be considered. So, nephesh, Strong's Hebrew dictionary, a breathing creature that is an animal, abstractly vitality, used very widely in a literal, accommodative, and a figurative sense, bodily or mental, and just read the rest of it here. We have to understand this for what it is. And even as Strong's admits itself when it says used very widely in a literal, accommodative, or even a figurative sense, that even though the meaning resorts to a breathing creature that is an animal, it doesn't dictate that that's how we must view God. For once again, Strong's also tells us that we can use the meaning figuratively. But even though that's so, seeing as God does not breathe oxygen like we do, it still tells us that he is a living being nonetheless who has vitality. So it's still a life. Therefore, if the devil were a real being, it would still have a soul of sorts also. Even if it's not the same as a human, because a soul just simply means a living being that has vitality, no matter its actual composition. I therefore conclude once more that the devil, if he were a literal being, cannot be exempt from God's decree that was quoted by Paul. Let's go again, Romans 13:1. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be, even the devils, are ordained of God. Let's end this with soul from Strong's Greek dictionary, in the Greek now. Breath, that is, by implication, a spirit, abstractly or concretely, the animal sentient principle only, thus distinguished, on the one hand, from this other Greek word, which is a rational and moral soul, and the other from another Greek word, which is mere vitality, even of plants. These terms thus exactly correspond, respectively, to the Hebrew word that we already looked at it just a minute ago. Heart, heartily, life, mind, soul, us, you. All right, back to the main part of the book. I'm going to ask again, does this not include the devil? That is, when we read once more Romans 13, 1 through 2, let every soul be subject to the higher powers, for there's no power but God, the powers that be are ordained of God. Does that not include the devil? Or is the devil exempt from that decree? Perhaps Paul should have specified then that the devil couldn't be in that count since he can't be controlled. And yet, here in the book of Job, even the Satan can't do anything to Job without God's express permission. Again, how does that fit in with the traditional teaching concerning Satan? No, this cannot be the Satan of Bible tradition, else the account in Job would have to read much differently.